Hello family, welcome to Stories by Tocci. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please subscribe and drop a like for us. This generosity would go a long way for us. Also share to family and friends. And please turn on post notification to stay tuned for more. Thank you as you do so. Now let's get into the story. In Port Harcourt, where the air often smelled of diesel and ambition, where glass buildings towered over rusted rooftops and every man wore pride like a wristwatch, there lived a man named Tocci whose name was whispered in banks and chanted in elite gatherings. He was the kind of man whose phone never stopped ringing and whose presence silenced boardrooms. He made his money in real estate, land, bricks, and concrete. The city bowed before him because he knew how to make the ground bleed gold. But power has a way of draping over a man like a garment until he no longer sees the outline of those around him. His wife, Adise, was once the queen of his empire. Together, they were the kind of couple that graced front-row tables at gala nights, hosted closed-door business dinners with governors, and traveled to Dubai just to escape a bad week. She was quiet, not because she didn't have things to say, but because she knew that silence had more weight than noise. In a city that moved too fast for sincerity, Adise moved slowly, elegantly, like a woman who had read the ending of the book and still chose to stay on the first page. She wasn't loud, but she was never invisible. And perhaps that's what frightened people the most, her calm. Tocci used to worship that calm, used to find refuge in it when the world tossed him about like dry leaves in rainy season. But over time, he grew restless. The same calm he once admired began to irritate him. He mistook her silence for weakness. And when a man confuses quiet for cowardice, destruction is already at his doorstep. Nora came like a soft breeze, but carried the chaos of a storm. She was the kind of woman who filled a room before she even entered it. Not beautiful in the traditional sense, but alluring in a way that made men stumble over themselves. She had ambition wrapped in perfume and youth packaged in confidence. She met Tocci during one of his site visits. He had stopped to inspect a property on Ellenwell Road, and she had been there, arguing with her contractor. That day, she told him his shirt didn't match his shoes, and he laughed for the first time in weeks. It started with text messages that stretched into midnight calls. From there, the slippery slope became a bed of roses that reeked of betrayal. Tocci began to smile differently. He started missing dinners, forgot anniversaries, and spent more time traveling for business. At first, Adise said nothing. She watched him change, bit her tongue until it bled in her mouth, and smiled at the staff even when her heart was a riot. Love, she knew, was not a cage, but she also knew that letting go without a strategy was like releasing your enemy from chains and handing them a dagger. And so she waited, watched, calculated. The final straw didn't come with lipstick on a collar or a strange scent in the sheets. It came in the form of a paper. A contract. An official agreement, signed, sealed, and stamped, granting Nora legal rights to a new property, a business stake, and a monthly allowance. The papers had been left carelessly in his study. And that was the day Adise stopped waiting. That night, the rain fell without mercy. Thunder rolled through the sky like drums at a funeral. Inside their penthouse, Tocci poured himself a glass of wine, humming to a song that wasn't playing. Adise sat across from him, watching the red liquid swirl in his glass like blood in a basin. He didn't notice her eyes, didn't feel the shift in the air, didn't sense that something ancient had cracked inside her. She said nothing. Her silence wasn't anger, it was preparation. That kind of silence doesn't beg, it plans. Before sunrise, she rose. Not in haste, not in panic. She folded her clothes like someone moving homes and not hearts. She placed her wedding ring on the marble counter beside the sink, positioned it upright, like a gravestone. She left her perfumes, her jewelry, even her shoes. All she took was a brown duffel bag, her ID, and a small leather folder that had been hidden for years at the back of her wardrobe. The driver didn't know where she was going, and she didn't offer any answer. As the car disappeared into the early morning fog, not a soul in the household stirred. It was as though the walls themselves respected her exit, and when the maid entered the room later that morning and saw the ring glinting under the bathroom light, she dropped the tray she was carrying. Nothing was said, but from that moment, even the air in that house changed. It no longer moved freely. It crept. By evening, Nora had arrived with luggage that screamed new money. Designer bags, bright wigs, perfumes that announced her presence before she turned a corner. She walked into the penthouse like a conqueror returning from battle. Tocci welcomed her with laughter and a kiss on the forehead. He poured wine for her in the same glass Adise had once used. Nora danced around the living room, talking about redecoration plans. She didn't ask where Adiz was, and Chike didn't say. It was as if the woman who had built the empire had vanished like vapor, unimportant, unmentioned. But houses remember. They remember the laughter that once filled their corners, the arguments that echoed in their walls, the perfume that clung to their curtains. As Nora settled in, strange things began to happen. The bedroom light flickered though the bulb was new. The washing machine overflowed twice without explanation. The dog barked endlessly at the master bedroom door. The cleaner crossed herself every time she passed the kitchen. And one night, when Nora opened a drawer to put in her jewelry, she found a handwritten note that simply read, "I saw everything. I said nothing." She screamed. Chike dismissed it as a prank. But even he didn't laugh as easily anymore. And somewhere in Port Harcourt, Adiz stood at a hotel window watching the rain slide down the glass. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply stood there, still, silent, and planning. Because sometimes, to strike properly, a woman must disappear first. The days that followed were painted with silence, but not the peaceful kind. It was the sort of silence that tightened its grip on your throat and refused to let go. The penthouse, once filled with the aroma of Adiz's bergamot tea and jazz music humming softly through the smart speakers, now felt like a hotel lobby, furnished, polished, and cold. Nora moved like a woman who had conquered, unaware that a throne inherited through betrayal never sits right. She woke early and paraded around in her silk robes, tossing her curls and snapping selfies in mirrors that once reflected a different queen. The staff obeyed her, but with tight lips and averted eyes. She thought it was because they didn't know her yet. But the truth was far more sinister. They weren't afraid of Nora. They were afraid of the silence that came before storms. Port Harcourt's sky burned hot during the day, but inside that house, the temperature dropped. Even the refrigerator began to hum louder, as if it too was uncomfortable. On the third morning, while Nora adjusted her makeup in Adiz's vanity, the drawer stuck. She forced it open and froze. Lying there, untouched and perfectly centered, was Adiz's necklace. Not just any necklace, but the coral-beaded chain Chike gifted her on their 10th wedding anniversary. Nora had seen it in photos. She had even admired it once. Her fingers trembled, and for the first time since her arrival, she shut the drawer softly, as though the past might wake up and walk back in. Chike returned home that evening with tired eyes and a voice that cracked when he spoke. The board meeting had been tense, and the commercial bank called about unusual activity on the Hillstone project account. He brushed it off. "System glitch," he said, though his gut disagreed. He found Nora curled on the couch, scrolling through property blogs. She patted the seat beside her, but he waved her off, poured himself a drink, and retreated to the bedroom, his shoulders heavy like he was carrying sandbags instead of secrets. The air in the room was thick. He sat on the bed and stared at his phone, unsure if he was waiting for a message or trying to erase one. The truth was, he hadn't heard from Adiz. No calls, no texts, no drama, nothing. And that nothing haunted him more than any confrontation ever could. Nora tiptoed in later, draped in a lace robe that barely touched her thighs. She slid into bed beside him, whispering sweet things, trying to create memories where others had been erased. But Chike couldn't sleep. The sheets smelled different. The silence was too loud. And somewhere between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., he had a dream. He stood in the living room, lights flickering. Adiz sat on the sofa, eyes locked on his, her hands holding the broken pieces of their wedding photo. He woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, heart pounding like a thief's knock on the door. Nora asked if he was okay, and he nodded, but inside, something had shifted. Regret had crept in, uninvited. Meanwhile, the staff whispered behind kitchen doors and servant quarters. The chef, a quiet man in his 50s, muttered prayers under his breath every morning. The housekeeper refused to clean the master bathroom unless someone else was present. Even the driver avoided idle chatter. The compound had become cursed ground, not because of ghosts, but because of what had been broken without repentance. Nora noticed the unease, but shrugged it off as resistance to change. "They'll get used to me," she told herself, adjusting the living room decor and ordering new wine glasses from an online store. She hired a photographer to take pictures of her new life for her lifestyle blog. In one of the shots, she stood on the balcony, draped in a red wrapper, holding a glass of champagne. She posted it with the caption, "When a woman knows her worth, the world adjusts." But the world didn't adjust. It stared. And behind every like and comment, there were whispers, curious, calculating, and critical. One woman commented, "Hope you checked the foundation before moving in." Nora deleted it, irritated. What she didn't know was that in Port Harcourt, people didn't speak directly. They spoke in parables, in carefully folded words that looked harmless until they cut. She started waking with tightness in her chest, dreams that made no sense, and a growing suspicion that nothing about her new life was truly hers. Something unseen was watching, and it wasn't done yet. On the fourth day, everything changed. It began with a simple moment, the kind that looks ordinary until you realize it's the beginning of an earthquake. Nora had gone to the laundry room to search for her missing blouse. She opened the dryer, and there it was, folded perfectly. She frowned. The staff didn't fold clothes inside the dryer. She reached in, and beneath the blouse was a small, folded note. Just one sentence. "It's not what you took, it's what you touched." She blinked. Her hands trembled. She called the housekeeper, who swore she hadn't touched that load. Nora didn't sleep that night. Her thoughts became noisy. She started to second-guess everything. The door she thought she locked, the glass she thought she washed, the conversation she thought she overheard between the security men. And the next morning, as she stood at the balcony taking another selfie, she looked down and saw a black Prado parked quietly outside the compound. No movement, no honking, just stillness. A shiver ran down her spine, though the morning breeze was warm. She turned and walked inside, heart racing, glass shaking in her hand. Behind her, the city of Port Harcourt continued its hustle. Kiki riders shouting, engines roaring, markets buzzing. But in that penthouse, silence returned, this time dressed in finality. The kind of silence that walks ahead of a reckoning. And Nora, for the first time, knew Adiz had not left. She had simply gone to sharpen her knife. Morning in Port Harcourt has a certain rhythm to it. Traffic clashing like cymbals, generators groaning awake, and the smell of pepper soup from roadside buka mixing with the metallic sting of fuel. But that Tuesday morning, the atmosphere inside Hillcrest Towers was painfully still. Nora stood in front of the mirror, struggling to tame her edges. Her lipstick, once a confident red, now looked unsure on her lips. She hadn't slept. Every creak in the house, every flicker of the chandelier, every cold brush of wind across her neck in the night made her heartbeat pound like talking drums at a village festival. When she finally stepped into the living room, she felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Something was different. The curtains swayed, yet the windows were shut. The air had that thickness you feel before rainfall. And then the knock came, not loud, not urgent, but deliberate, like someone who didn't need permission. The gatekeeper, a young boy barely 20, hesitated before opening. And there she was, Adiz, black from head to toe. Not the black of mourning, but the black of a woman who'd danced with fire and come back with ash in her palms. Her heels struck the pavement like a metronome, and her presence entered before her body crossed the threshold. No driver, no luggage. Just her in a small brown bag, worn but clean. The boy stepped aside, head bowed like he was watching a masquerade pass. And she walked in. Nora heard the door open and froze. Her first instinct was to hide, her second to run. But pride kept her rooted. She clutched her robe tighter and peeked from the staircase. And there, in the middle of the living room, sitting like she never left, was Adiz, legs crossed, shoulders relaxed, her handbag resting on the arm of the chair like a sleeping cat. A soft smile curled her lips. Not warm. Not cruel. Just calm. Nora couldn't move. The sound of the AC, the ticking of the wall clock, the low hum of the city outside, it all faded into a kind of eerie stillness. Then Adiz spoke. Her voice carried no edge, no haste. Just wait. Tell Chaik I'm home. And tell him not to keep me waiting. That was it. No insult. No raised voice. Just a sentence that felt like a fuse being lit. Nora managed a nod before scampering upstairs. Her legs shook like dry leaves caught in harmattan wind. She grabbed her phone and called Chaik, but the line rang out. Again. And again. Meanwhile, downstairs, Adiz remained seated, gently brushing invisible lint off her skirt. Time moved, but she did not. She waited like a queen expecting a court appearance. There was no rush. She already knew how this chapter would end. It was only a matter of when the others would catch up to the plot. Chaik arrived just after noon, his car screeching into the compound with a desperation he hadn't felt in years. The gate barely had time to swing before he leapt out, suit wrinkled, tie loosened, eyes wild. He burst into the living room and stopped mid-step. There she was, Adiz. The woman he once claimed was too soft, too slow, too quiet. And now, she sat before him like the judge, the jury, and the executioner. Nora appeared behind him, but neither woman looked her way. Adiz opened her bag slowly, as though retrieving a sacred text, and placed a brown envelope on the table. "Sit," she said, and Chaik obeyed without thought. It was the first time in his life he realized that fear doesn't always come with shouting. Sometimes, it's the whisper in a room full of silence. She opened the envelope. Inside, signed documents. Transfers. Emails. Statements. Proof. And not just proof of betrayal, but of stupidity. In the 72 hours she had disappeared, Adiz had not gone to weep or lick her wounds. She had gone to war, legal war, financial war, strategic war. She had frozen accounts, reclaimed properties, secured boardroom power, and reshuffled company shares that had been sleeping quietly in her name. And now, she laid everything out on the table, not as a warning, but as confirmation. Nora's face drained of color. Chaik's hands trembled slightly, though he tried to steady them. Adiz looked at them both. "I built this house. I fed it, watered it, decorated its soul. You broke it, but I came back not to clean it up, but to evict the termites." Nora didn't wait for another word. She stood, first slowly, then with haste. The look Adiz gave her was not anger. It was pity, and somehow that was worse. Nora fumbled for her shoes, but abandoned them halfway. She dashed out of the house, barefoot, robe flapping like torn sails in the wind. No handbag. No pride. No plan. Just flight. The compound watched in stunned silence as she disappeared down the estate road. Not a single person moved to help her. Chaik stood frozen, staring at the doorway she had just vanished through. Adiz remained seated. She did not gloat. She did not smile. She simply reached for her bag, zipped it shut, and stood. She turned to Chaik, and her voice was as level as ever. "You forgot the kind of woman I am. That was your first mistake." She walked past him, her heels echoing against the tiled floor. At the door she paused. "Don't worry. I didn't come back to stay. I came back to finish." Then she stepped out, leaving behind a silence thicker than cement. Outside, the sun burned high over Port Harcourt, casting long shadows behind her as she walked away. But in that house, no light reached Chaik. He sat alone on the edge of the sofa, holding papers he no longer had power over, in a home that no longer belonged to him. And he finally understood. Not all storms come with thunder. Some arrive wearing lipstick and leather heels, speaking softly, but carrying the weight of an empire. Port Harcourt didn't pause that day. The city kept moving, stubborn as ever, its okadas weaving through traffic, hawkers shouting prices into humid air, and fuel station lines crawling like wounded snakes. But in Hillcrest Towers, time had bent. The silence that followed Adiz's departure didn't settle, it hovered. It didn't sit beside Chaik, it sat on his chest. He remained in the living room long after she had gone, the brown envelope still open before him like a wound that wouldn't close. The documents inside told a story he had refused to read. Bank withdrawals reversed, property deeds redrafted, company rights clawed back. She hadn't only left and returned. She had risen. And now he sat there, not as a husband, but as a lesson. He picked up his phone. Dialed. Hung up. Dialed again. Her number was still switched off. He texted her. Nothing. The room around him felt foreign. The furniture stiff. The air heavy. And the house, once his fortress, now felt like a museum of miscalculations. Every clock ticked louder. The AC hissed like it was mocking him. He looked toward the staircase, half expecting Nora to return, but even her perfume had disappeared. In 72 hours, he had gone from king of the manor to tenant in borrowed robes. And worse, he had no audience left to pretend for. Adiz had stripped the game of its illusion, and left him to face the mirror without his masks. The next few days moved in fragments. Chaik didn't go to the office. His boardroom access had been quietly frozen, pending an emergency audit that had Adiz's fingerprints all over it. His PA now responded with, "I'll check and get back to you, sir," a phrase she'd never used before. He tried to enter one of his company's private bank accounts and was greeted with a blank screen, access restricted. The lawyer he had trusted with the Nora agreement didn't return his calls. He drove across town to speak to the man in person, but was told by the receptionist that Mr. Amati isn't available today or any day this week. The cold shoulder wasn't accidental, it was orchestrated. Adiz had made her moves in silence, but each one landed like a hammer. On the third evening, Chaik returned home to find the household help gathered in whispers. The cook nodded politely. The housekeeper avoided eye contact. The driver merely handed him the car keys without a word. And when he walked into the master bedroom, he found all his clothes moved into the smaller guest room across the hallway. No one had told him. No one needed to. There, neatly stacked on the guest bed, were his shirts, suits, and cufflinks, all folded with the kind of care that felt more like pity. On the bedside table lay a folded paper. One sentence, in Adi's neat handwriting. This is not exile. It's adjustment. That night, Chike didn't sleep. Not because of nightmares, but because he was finally awake. In her absence, Adi's presence only grew. She didn't return to the house. She didn't call or text. She didn't explain. But her shadow stretched over every inch of Chike's world like a quiet storm cloud. The clients who once laughed at his jokes now requested meetings with the board instead. Vendors began renegotiating contracts, emboldened by whispers of a change in leadership. Rumors circulated that Adiz had been offered a consultancy deal in Abuja by an old associate. Whether true or not, it made the rounds through Port Harcourt's elite like wildfire on dry harmattan grass. Chike, meanwhile, was losing weight, gradually, quietly. He stopped shaving. His voice became softer, uncertain. He rarely left Hillcrest Towers except for meetings he could no longer cancel. He drove himself now. His driver, sensing his fall, had resigned without notice. The house had become his prison, every room a cell of memory. He walked the hallways like a stranger, trailed by echoes of footsteps that once danced beside his. In the early hours of dawn, he often found himself standing at the edge of the balcony where Nora had taken her last photo. But there was no wind this time, no light in his eyes, just the vast city before him, indifferent and untouchable. He used to think he controlled Port Harcourt. Now Port Harcourt didn't even remember his name. The staff adapted to the new order like plants turning toward the sun. They no longer asked when Adiz would return. They didn't need to. Her fingerprints were already on everything. From the way the accounts were being monitored to the new security rotation schedule implemented by her firm. The house breathed with her discipline. And though she wasn't there physically, her return had reset the temperature. Nora's name was never spoken again. No one knew where she had gone, only that she had left Port Harcourt the very next morning. Someone claimed she'd been seen boarding a night bus to Enugu, face hidden under a scarf, shoes in hand. Another said she fled to Ghana, where she had distant relatives. Chike tried calling her once, just once, but the line never connected. He deleted the number the same evening. Adiz, on the other hand, was never spoken of in past tense. The help referred to her with present verbs. Madam said, Madam prefers, Madam wants. The power had shifted so subtly, so completely, it no longer needed physical presence to be enforced. And as Chike sat one evening, staring at a glass of untouched whiskey, he realized what he had underestimated. Not her intelligence, not her silence, but her endurance. Adiz had waited, not because she was weak, but because some women let fools build their own gallows before returning with the rope. And now, she didn't need to say anything to prove she had won. Her absence was louder than any argument could ever be. The thing about power is that when it shifts, it doesn't always make a sound. Sometimes it drips into the room like a leaking faucet, quiet, constant, inescapable. That's how Adiz's authority settled over Hillcrest Towers. Not with orders or grand declarations, but with a precision that left no room for confusion. Every system she had ever installed, every control panel, email alert, financial dashboard, came back online like soldiers waking at their commander's whistle. The house now moved on a rhythm only she could hear. The cleaner began receiving a new schedule every Sunday evening via email. The chef's groceries were cross-checked twice a week by someone from Adiz's company office. Even the generator maintenance team started arriving unannounced, their invoices addressed to her firm, not Chike's. He noticed all these things, of course. He noticed everything now. But he didn't protest. He knew better. It was as if the penthouse itself had remembered its rightful owner. The lights brightened when she was mentioned. The elevator paused an extra beat when someone said, Madam. The silence, which once rang like judgment, had evolved into something else entirely, obedience. And in the middle of it all sat Chike, watching the empire he thought he ruled slowly bend toward the woman he had betrayed, like trees leaning toward the sun. By the second week, Chike began to wither in ways no one could see, but everyone could feel. He still dressed well, his shirts were crisp, his shoes shined, but there was a hollowness behind the polish. He began talking less, as though every word cost him more than he could afford. His phone calls shortened. His laughter thinned. He started sitting alone at the breakfast table, staring at plates he didn't touch, reading newspapers he didn't process. His driver's seat, once warmed by assistance and flattery, now held only silence and tension. One morning, while shaving, he looked at himself in the mirror and saw the edges of regret forming lines around his eyes. He reached for the aftershave Adiz used to buy him, the one she said smelled like quiet success, and paused. It was empty. Not just finished, but completely dry, as if even the scent had packed up and left him. That evening, he received a text from one of their former investors. Heard Madam is restructuring the Lecky portfolio. She's smart. You're lucky. He didn't reply. What could he say? That he had spent years thinking she was ornamental, something to be shown off and shelved? That he believed her silence was submission? He wanted to scream, but pride has no voice when the truth is louder. And the truth was this: Adiz hadn't just returned, she had reset the rules. Port Harcourt's business circles felt the tremor too. Adiz didn't show her face, but her influence tightened like thread through a needle. The whispers began first. A merger she proposed 3 years ago, one Chaik had scoffed at, was suddenly revived under her name, backed by 3 silent partners from Abuja. A boutique investment firm listed her as strategic advisor. A popular real estate podcast referenced her work ethic as surgical. She hadn't posted a single picture. She hadn't stepped on a single stage. But the streets of money moved for her like water parting for Moses. Chaik's calls to the bank took longer to return. His invites to elite dinners stopped coming. Even his closest business friends began to offer advice with the tone of a priest delivering last rites. Lay low for now, Chaik, one of them said over drinks. Sometimes when you lose a queen, the whole board tilts. He smiled weakly and nodded, but inside, he felt the truth scrape bone. Adiz wasn't interested in revenge. She didn't block his accounts out of anger or plaster his sins across gossip blogs. She simply moved forward, and in doing so left him behind. She didn't shout. She didn't explain. She didn't gloat. But her silence was thick with meaning, the kind that drowns a man slowly without needing water. Late one night, Chaik stood in the corridor outside the master bedroom door, the one he had been locked out of. He placed his hand gently on the knob, not to open it, but to feel if it still remembered him. It didn't. The door felt cold, foreign. He stood there in his robe, listening to the soft humming of the hallway generator, trying to remember the last time Adiz laughed in that room. Not just smiled, laughed. That full, unguarded laughter that made her shoulders shake and her eyes glisten. He couldn't remember. All the memories he had were distant now, like echoes bouncing off the walls of someone else's life. He walked away barefoot and stood by the kitchen island. The marble felt icy against his palm. In that moment, he realized he was no longer the man of the house, not in ownership, not in presence, not even in memory. The house had repelled him, not with force, but with finality. When he finally climbed into his guest room bed and closed his eyes, he whispered her name once. Not loudly, not with hope, but with the ache of a man who now understood that he hadn't lost her because she left. He lost her the day he forgot she could, and in that understanding he slept. Not peacefully, but heavily, like a man buried under the weight of a crown he had stolen and could no longer wear. Dawn broke quietly over Port Harcourt, the sun slipping through the high-rise buildings like a thief avoiding the light. From his window in Hillcrest Towers, Chaik watched the day begin with a hollow heart. The city no longer responded to his presence. The streets that once parted at the sound of his name had forgotten him. His reflection stared back from the glass, older now, not in years, but in weight. That morning, he didn't dress for a meeting. There was none. He didn't iron a shirt or polish his shoes. He poured black coffee he didn't drink and sat in silence. Every object in the room had become a relic, framed memories of a time when he thought the world would always wait for him. But time, as he had now learned, waits for no man. His phone vibrated. Not a call, just a calendar reminder. Board review, Lecky Phase 2 proposal. Adiz proposal. He stared at it for a full minute before deleting it. The screen went dark again, leaving only his face in its reflection. Downstairs, the house stirred without him. The cleaner vacuumed. The driver washed a car he would never drive. And when he passed the corridor where Adiz's scent once lingered, he paused, not out of nostalgia, but to feel the absence. Absence has a texture. It's cold, quiet, and suffocating. He touched the wall like it might offer something, but it didn't. Walls don't speak for the woman who built them. They only echo the silence she leaves behind. Elsewhere in the city, Adiz moved with a grace that didn't seek attention, yet drew it like honey attracts flies. She had become the woman people spoke of in closed-door meetings and private dinners, the name whispered with respect, fear, and a touch of envy. She didn't return to Hillcrest Towers. Not because she couldn't, but because she no longer needed to. Her presence had already outgrown the building. She now occupied spaces that didn't need walls, her influence flowing through contracts, investments, and opportunities reappearing like old debts finally being repaid. She walked through lobbies where once she had been introduced as Chike's wife, and now people stood to greet her simply as Adiz. No surname, no attachment, just her. One afternoon, as she sat at a rooftop lounge in GRA sipping lime water, a former client approached her with cautious eyes. "Madam, I've been meaning to say. I never saw it coming. The way you handled everything." She smiled lightly and stirred her glass. "That's the point," she said. "If you see it coming, it's not a lesson. It's a warning." The man chuckled nervously, unsure if he'd been complimented or condemned. Adiz wasn't trying to teach the world. She had no interest in lectures. She didn't write think pieces or give motivational talks. She simply lived her life as evidence. And in Port Harcourt, that was enough. Her story was now gospel among the elite, a parable that reminded every room that the quietest person isn't always the weakest, just the one with the sharpest memory. Back at Hillcrest, the air began to change. The scent of Adiz's lavender oil no longer clung to the walls. Her curated flower vases had been replaced, her delicate kitchen arrangements disrupted by new hands. And yet, despite all the changes, the space never accepted the substitutions. The dining room looked bigger without her laughter. The hallway felt longer without her heels. Chike sat most evenings on the balcony with the same drink in hand, untouched, watching the traffic below. Sometimes he'd receive a message from someone he used to command, a business associate requesting Adiz's contact, a family friend asking if she was attending an event. Each message reminded him of the throne he had abandoned for a shadow. One afternoon, a courier arrived with a simple envelope. Inside was a formal notification. Adiz was finalizing the legal exit from their joint business trust. No message, no farewell, just the final stamp of her complete independence. He stared at the paper for hours, reading it without absorbing. And when he finally folded it and placed it in the drawer, he didn't curse. He didn't cry. He simply stood, walked to the mirror, and accepted the face looking back at him, not as a man who lost everything, but as one who deserved to. The price of betrayal, he now understood, wasn't always rage. Sometimes, it was the quiet realization that the person you wronged no longer thinks of you at all. The final Saturday of the month came with still air and heavy skies. At a boutique art gallery in old GRA, Adiz stepped out of a black SUV, wearing a white silk blouse and wide-legged trousers, her hair pinned high like a crown she didn't need to declare. The gallery buzzed with artists, investors, and cultural figures. As she moved through the rooms, people parted respectfully. She wasn't flashy, she never had been. But her presence pulled at people's attention like gravity. A teenage girl, standing near a sculpture, approached her with wide eyes. "Auntie, is it true you once left everything and came back after just 3 days?" Adiz looked at her, amused. "That depends. What do you think I came back for?" The girl hesitated. "To fight." Adiz smiled, that calm, lethal smile. "No, I came to finish." The girl blinked, unsure how to respond. Adiz turned, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor, and walked toward a painting titled Inheritance. In that moment, under the soft lights of the gallery, she wasn't a woman scorned. She was a woman restored. Not by time or pity, but by her own quiet, methodical defiance. Outside, the sky rumbled. A storm was coming, but this time, she wouldn't be caught in it. She was the one pulling the clouds. And somewhere far away, in the same penthouse he once ruled, Chike sat in silence, still hoping she'd call. But queens don't return to burned palaces. They build new ones where no one forgets who owns the key. In this life, never mistake silence for weakness, and never underestimate someone just because they don't speak loudly. Wisdom doesn't always shout. Sometimes it watches and waits. Protect your peace. Protect your name. And most importantly, never play with someone who built with you, thinking they can't rebuild without you. Respect is not demanded, it is earned, and when it is lost, not even wealth can buy it back. May you never be replaced in the place you labored. May the tables never turn against you in the house you helped to furnish. May your silence never be mistaken for defeat, and your kindness never be used as a doorway for betrayal. If anyone plots behind your back, may God put wisdom in your hands and victory in your steps. May you rise above every setup. May your enemies scatter without a fight. And when the time comes to reclaim your peace, may you return with power, not pain. With calm, not chaos. With grace, not grudge. Your crown will not be stolen. Your seat will not be given away. And may your presence always speak louder than your absence. If you believe it, type it in the comments and shout, Amen. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Turn on post notifications. See you on our next story.